So let me start the chapter of price mechanism. Students, price mechanism, the whole chapter is very analytical, very conceptual. It will be clear to you if your knowledge of demand chapter and supply chapter are very sound. If the knowledge of demand chapter and supply chapter is okay with you, then you can understand this chapter. Now, firstly, what is price mechanism? Price mechanism or market mechanism is a process in which the market price of different commodities, of a particular commodity, suppose, is determined by the market forces of demand and supply. That means the price at which quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. That price is considered as equilibrium price. The price at which demand is equal to supply. That price is considered as equilibrium price, and that price will be kept as the price of the commodity. Okay, this is price mechanism. Now, how do we depict it in a graph, in a diagram? Diagrammatically, how do we illustrate it? That's very important. So, let me show it. Along the x-axis, as usual, quantity demanded as well as quantity supplied. Along the y-axis, price. Usual demand curve DD downward sloping. Usual supply curve SS upward sloping. This is the point E. Point E where the two curves are cutting each other. So in any graph, when two curves cut each other, they are equal. So here at the point E, when the two curves DD and SS are cutting each other, that means demand is equal to supply over this at this point. Now, I draw this price line, let it be P0. That means the equilibrium price is OP0. And this is the quantity Q0. That means quantity demanded as well as quantity supplied, both. This is the basic thing in the diagram. Now if I consider a price like this, P1. At this price P1, we find quantity demanded is less, whereas quantity supplied is more. Let this be A and this is B. Then quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. Demand is less, supply is more. Quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. So as supply is greater, demand is less, by how much? By this AB portion, this portion. Then this is called excess supply. Now whenever there is excess supply, supply is greater, then the price tends to fall. The price tends to fall, there will be a reduction in the price. This is one part. Now let me consider the opposite of this. If I consider a price like this, below the equilibrium price. This P1 price which I have considered, this is above the equilibrium price. Now I consider P2, the price which is below the equilibrium price. At this price we find quantity supplied is less, quantity demanded is more. Let this be R and this is T, suppose. Now I find quantity supplied is this much, P2R, whereas quantity demanded is P2T. Then the quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied by how much? By this much, RT portion. And this is excess demand. And whenever there is excess demand, the price tends to rise. The price tends to rise. So this is the basic diagram, the basic thing about price mechanism. I hope this illustration makes it clear what is price mechanism. Now I'll go into the details, several other questions which are applications of this, and also the application of your knowledge of demand chapter and supply chapter. I hope I can rub this one, I can erase this one because this is I've done and it's clear to you. Now, several questions in this chapter are made which are application of this. Like one first exemplar question. What will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity? What will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity if there is increase in demand? This is the question. What will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity if there is increase in demand? Now, here in this answer, this type of question is often asked in ISC. In the answer to this question, the diagram, the graph, is very, very important. That is self-explanatory diagram. The diagram itself speaks out what is the answer here. In the diagram, the first thing that you have to do is the basic diagram, that cross diagram, demand curve, cutting supply curve, and how do we determine the equilibrium price. That is to be made first, at first there. Now, you have to recall a particular thing from demand chapter here, because in the question it is asked what would happen to equilibrium price and quantity if there is increase in demand. If you recall, in the demand chapter you have studied that there is increase in demand. What happens if there is increase in demand? Increase in demand implies at the same price a larger quantity is demanded. At the same price a larger quantity is demanded. That means there will be a rightward shifting of the demand curve. There will be a rightward shifting of the demand curve. Parallel rightward shifting of the downward sloping. Usual demand curve will draw, but then there will be a rightward shifting. Suppose from D1 to D2 D2. D1 is the left one, and after rightward shifting it will be D2 D2. Will you do anything regarding the supply curve? No, not at all, because in the question it is asked what would happen to the equilibrium price and quantity if there is increase in demand. See, only in case of demand something happens, that is indicated. There is nothing specified regarding supply. As nothing is specified regarding supply, we have to keep the supply curve as it is, that means upward sloping. Now let me illustrate the diagram here. As usual, along the x-axis we measure quantity, along the y-axis we measure price. This is the demand curve, D1, the first one, initial one, and supply curve is SS. The equilibrium point is this, the initial equilibrium point E1, let it be. And the equilibrium price is this one, let it be P1, and quantity is Q1. Fine, this is the initial thing. Now after this, what happens? There's an increase in demand. And if there's an increase in demand, then the demand curve shifts towards right. So I draw parallel demand curve, parallel to this one. You don't have to make exactly accurately parallel. By looking at it, it should seem to be parallel. Then D2, D2. In between the two demand curves, there must be an arrow like this towards right. Otherwise, how can the examiner understand whether you are showing rightward shifting or leftward shifting? So a rightward arrow is given like this. Now, see what happens. This new demand curve cuts the supply curve where? Here. Now before that, what happens is if we maintain the original price, the initial price, equilibrium price, what happens if I extend it like this? If I extend it, then at this original initial price, quantity demanded has become more, whereas quantity supplied is still the same. That means demand is more than supply. Demand becomes this much, whereas supply is only this much. So demand is greater than supply. Earlier I told you, whenever there is excess demand, price tends to rise. See, the equilibrium price will rise here. Equilibrium price will rise, and ultimately here, when the new demand curve cuts the supply curve, then this is the new equilibrium point, E2. And the equilibrium price, the new equilibrium price is this, P2. New equilibrium quantity is Q2. Now, ultimately what we are going to write here in the written part after this, see, equilibrium price rises, equilibrium quantity also rises. This is what we are going to write at the end. At the end, we have to write as an answer, because of increase in demand, because of increase in demand, the equilibrium price increases and the equilibrium quantity also increases. This is the answer to the question. I'm writing the question also. Question is, what will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity when, or if you can write, there is increase in demand. So the question is this, and the answer to the question is this one, the graph. And after the graph, you are supposed to write that statement: because of increase in demand, the equilibrium price rises or increases, and the equilibrium quantity also rises or increases. So this is one illustration of what kind of question is asked on the basis of that basic diagram, the basic concept, and also your knowledge of demand chapter. See, this increase in demand is from the demand chapter. Likewise, question can be asked regarding supply curve also. Let me now erase it, because I'll be showing something else, another case, another question's answer we will discuss now. If this question was regarding the increase in demand, the next question, similar thing but something else. What will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity if, what will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity if there is decrease in supply? The question says if there is decrease in supply. In the earlier question I have discussed regarding demand, now decrease in supply. See, in the question nothing is specified regarding demand. So demand curve will keep it as usual, downward sloping, only one curve. But as here in the question is specified decrease in supply. If there is increase in supply, rightward shifting. If there is decrease in supply, so leftward shifting. Thus there will be a leftward parallel shifting of the supply curve. Leftward parallel shifting of the supply curve. So I will illustrate that in the graph. And the determination of the equilibrium price and quantity, how do we do it? It's very much like the previous one. That is why I'm saying that the understanding of the concept is so very important here. If you understand the previous one, definitely you can do this one and any other question which is asked on the basis of this kind of thing. Now let me show it. I'll write the question later. First the diagram. Along the x-axis as usual, quantity. Along the y-axis it is price. Then usual demand curve D. And the usual supply curve S1. See here, as there will be a change in the supply, so S1. And the original or initial equilibrium point is E1. This is equilibrium price P1, initially equilibrium quantity Q1. Fine. Now as there is decrease in supply, what would happen? There will be a leftward shifting of the supply curve. Leftward shifting of the supply curve. Parallel leftward shifting of the supply curves. So it becomes S2 from S1. And also definitely in between the two supply curves we must put this arrow leftward. Otherwise how can the examiner understand whether you are showing a rightward shifting or leftward shifting? So a leftward arrow. Now very much the same concept, where the new supply curve cuts the demand curve. Where? At this point the new supply curve cuts the demand curve. This is E2. The equilibrium price is this, P2. Equilibrium quantity Q2. Now what do we notice here? See, because of this thing, equilibrium price rises but the equilibrium quantity falls. It was Q1, it becomes Q2, equilibrium quantity, and equilibrium price rises. So here, because of decrease in supply, there is no change in the demand. Because of decrease in supply, there is a leftward shifting of the supply curve, and for that, equilibrium price rises from P1 to P2, and equilibrium quantity falls or decreases from Q1 to Q2. And that you have to write at the end. Now the question. The question is, what will be the effect on equilibrium price and quantity, comma, if there is decrease in supply? So this is the question, and the answer to the question is this one. So I hope by these two illustrations, this kind of thing is very clear to you. Now, some other type of questions which are asked in this chapter. Actually, the concept will remain the same. But now, I will test your knowledge of elasticity of demand and supply also. Because this kind of question is also very common. In the past, in ISC, they have given this kind of question. Suppose the question is, indicate a situation in which the equilibrium price remains constant or equilibrium price remains unchanged even if there is a decrease in supply. Okay, decrease in demand. Let me consider decrease in demand because decrease in supply I have just shown. So indicate a situation in which the equilibrium price will remain the same even if there is decrease in demand. Now here in this, you will not straight away draw that cross diagram, demand curve, downward sloping, supply curve, upward sloping and cutting each other. No, because you have to understand what will happen here. The question says equilibrium price will remain the same, remain constant, remain unchanged even if there is decrease in supply. Now the diagram for this, for that, along the y-axis as usual price, along the x-axis it is quantity, now if the equilibrium price is to remain the same, though there is decrease in demand, now firstly what we'll do, demand curve decrease in demand, so D1 initial demand curve, and if there is decrease in demand then parallel leftward shifting to D2, and see the leftward arrow must be given again in order to reflect that there is decrease in demand. Now if the equilibrium price is to remain the same, see, how do we get equilibrium price? When demand curve and supply curve cut each other, then we get the equilibrium point and equilibrium price. Here if equilibrium price is to remain the same, remain unchanged, then the supply curve has to be horizontal one. It has to be a horizontal supply curve. What do we call it? We call it perfectly elastic supply. Perfectly elastic supply. So if I draw a horizontal supply curve, you must write here SS, otherwise you'll get 0. So
insufficient storage লেখা কি করব, ক্যান্সেল না ক্লিয়ার?